Hello everyone and welcome to this installment of SLA's Partner Talks. Today's presentation is brought to you by Sage Publications. This session is being recorded for future viewing and sharing. Before turning it over to the team, just a few housekeeping items to review. Today's session will wrap up with questions and answers, so as you think of them, please type your questions into the questions box on your control panel to your right. We will also be supplementing this session with a discussion on Twitter, so if you'd like to join us, please add the hashtag SageTalk to your tweets. And you'll see that hashtag at the bottom of each slide of the presentation. Without further ado, I will turn the stage over to Will Schweitzer of Sage Publications, who will introduce our speaker today. Will, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Will Schweitzer, Senior Journal Editor at Sage Publications. On behalf of Sage, I'd like to introduce Aime Ballard-Wood, the Director of Publications for the Association for Psychological Science. Sage is very proud to publish the association's 5 journals and to support many of the initiatives Aime will present on today. So with that, welcome, and here's Aime.
Thank you, Will, and thank you to SLA and to Sage for inviting me to talk today. We have a lot going on here at the Association for Psychological Science, and I'm excited to get to introduce our initiatives to a new audience. I hope you'll all find the information useful, and I hope that you'll be able to help us as well. The first thing that I want to do is give you a bit of information about APS. Then I'm going to tell you about 3 ways we're trying to improve not just the dissemination of information about psychological science, but the information itself. The first 2 are activities that take place in our journals, and the third is our Wikipedia initiative. And by the end, I hope that you'll all come away with a few action items to keep in mind as you work with faculty, students, and your other users. Founded in 1988, the Association for Psychological Science is dedicated to the advancement of scientific psychology and its representation at the national and international level. The association's mission is to promote, protect, and advance the interests of scientifically oriented psychology in research, application, teaching, and the improvement of human welfare. APS has over 26,000 members in 90 countries. Our members represent every major field of psychology. The largest numbers are in cognitive psychology, personality and social psychology, developmental psychology, and clinical psychology. Around 33% are college students. The rest include academics, researchers, teachers, administrators, and clinicians. They're found in universities and colleges of all sizes and in departments ranging from education to neuroscience. They're also working in government and business. Our activities are mostly what you'd expect of a large professional society. APS's annual convention draws over 4,000 attendees each year to share information about the latest scientific research and methodologies. We host sessions at international meetings, such as the European Conference on Developmental Psychology and the European Society for Cognitive Psychology. And we're organizing the inaugural International Convention of Psychological Science, which will take place in Amsterdam in 2015. ICPS is the world's first international conference dedicated to advances in all areas of psychological science. We have an extremely active and successful news and information program, conducting outreach to raise the visibility and understanding of psychological science among the general public. And APS leaders work with funders and policymakers in and around DC to support psychological scientists, the field, and the public. Our Student Caucus provides student affiliates with resources and networking opportunities as they develop their careers. And we support the teaching of psychology by providing teachers at all levels with access to research, news, and resources. Our Postdoc Exchange is an online network connecting researchers with a listing of postdoctoral opportunities around the world. And our Wikipedia initiative enlists the psychological science community to develop and improve psychology entries. I'll be telling you more about that later. By far the most important thing that we do is publish 5 of the top journals in psychology. The journals cover the entire field of psychological science, from empirical research featured in the flagship journal, Psychological Science, to broad overviews and thought pieces and perspectives on psychological science, to reviews that are written to be accessible to non-experts in current directions in psychological science, and state-of-the-science reports on topics of direct relevance to policymakers and the public in psychological science and the public interest. As of last year, we also have our first specialty journal, Clinical Psychological Science, which seeks to improve understanding of the mechanisms of mental health and dysfunction by publishing research that crosses the boundaries between psychology and other disciplines, everything from neuroscience to genetics to nutrition. We have new and exciting things going on in all of our journals, but I'm going to focus on efforts in psychological science and perspectives on psychological science that are leading the way to improving replicability and research practices, not only in psychology, but across all of science. To understand our efforts, it's important to know a bit of background about what's been called the replicability crisis. Whether you think it's a crisis or not, and no matter where you think its roots began, it's impossible to deny that events in 2011 and 2012 brought questions about the reproducibility of research and about common research practices to the fore. I started working with APS in March of 2011, just in time for all of the fun to begin. That month, the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology published a paper by Daryl Bem claiming to demonstrate that future events retroactively affect people's responses. Basically, it was claiming to show ESP, and the journal was widely ridiculed for it. Around the same time, several authors published reports about their colleagues' unwillingness or inability to share data. And Simmons and colleagues published a paper in the APS Journal of Psychological Science revealing the ways in which researchers can reach the conclusions they want by cherry-picking findings and ignoring basic statistical practices. They claim that flexibility in data collection, analysis, and reporting dramatically increases false positive rates. They term this researcher degrees of freedom. You might have heard of the related term p-hacking. 2011 also saw a highly publicized case of fraud involving a prolific Dutch social psychologist named Dietrich Stoppel. The stories about that reached out of academia and far into mainstream media. 2012 brought more of the same. Yuri Simonson, one of the authors of the article on false positives, posted a paper in which he used statistics to reveal improbable findings in the work of several of his fellow scientists. Leslie John and her colleagues published a paper in Psychological Science presenting the results of a survey of more than 2,000 research psychologists. John found that most had engaged in at least one questionable practice, such as p-hacking, at some point in their careers. And science magazines and blogs weighed in on the woes of psychological science. It certainly got people talking. It got them talking about long-standing and structural contributions like publication bias and the file drawer problem, a hyper-competitive academic climate without out-of-whack reward structures, both in tenure and in funding. And around here, we were a little bit relieved to see that the problems weren't just in psychological science. In cancer biology, for example, one study found that of 53 landmark papers, only 6 had scientific findings that held up under scrutiny. As all of this was happening, people also started working on a range of solutions, such as psychfiledrawer.org, the Reproducibility Project, psychdisclosure.org, and various data sharing policies. APS became involved on larger fronts, such as discussions with NIH, NSF, and other organizations about issues around funding. We also started talking about implications for research, drawing on the big data resulting from large-scale longitudinal studies in areas such as aging. But we also recognized that with the leading journals in the field, APS and the editors were in an excellent position to affect change and set examples. They've all done this in small ways, for example, by making the community aware that they're open to publishing replications, by simply doing just that. And they've also done it in big ways. Perspectives on Psychological Science dedicated its November 2012 issue to discussions of replicability and research practices. Articles from that issue, which is open access, by the way, have been downloaded more than 500,000 times. And we know anecdotally that the audience extends way beyond the borders of psychology. That special issue has been followed by similar special sections. There's a list of them here. And we've made all of those free as well. And both Perspectives and Psych Science launched new initiatives to put their money where their mouths are. In psych sciences, takes the form of new standards and expectations for submitted manuscripts. And in perspectives, it takes the form of a new article type called the Registered Replication Report. Let's start with psych science. As of January 1st, 2014, the journal submission guidelines include several initiatives to enhance the reporting of research and increase scientific transparency. They involve word limits, disclosure, statistics, and open practices. The method and results sections of a manuscript are now excluded from the word limits on research articles and research reports. This means that a word count includes only the introductory and discussion sections, any notes, acknowledgments, and appendixes. We do provide authors with some guidance on what an appropriate range for the word count might be, but there's no strict limit on the sections where the authors describe their methods and results. The intent of this is to give them plenty of space to report what they did and what they found, and we hope it's in a manner that's not only clear and concise, but complete. In the wake of the revelations about unsound research practices, many in the community have discussed creating simple public norms for reporting what should be requisite information on exclusions, manipulations, measures, and sample size. So to promote that reporting, psych science authors are now asked to complete a disclosure statement consisting of 4 checkbox items when they're submitting a manuscript. Submitting authors must check each item before their manuscript can proceed to peer review. And by doing so, they actively declare that they've disclosed all the required information for each study within the manuscript. The goals of these requirements are to enhance reporting of methods and promote sound research practices. The idea being, for example, that an author can't p-hack if she has to report all of the relevant measures and variables and describe the rules that she used for stopping data collection. A third initiative is to encourage authors to abandon null hypothesis significance testing and p-values altogether, and instead use the so-called new statistics. The new statistics, which really aren't that new, emphasize effect sizes, confidence intervals, and meta-analyses. To help promote rather than prescribe this, Psych Science published a tutorial by Jeff Cumming of La Trobe University in Australia that introduces the rationale, the recommendations, and the resources for researchers who want to start using these statistics. That publicly available tutorial is also just the start. At the upcoming APS annual convention, Jeff's statistics workshop will be filmed, and the resulting videos of the various components will be made freely available via our website. The last of the Psych Science initiatives involves awarding badges to authors who engage in transparent research practices, open data, open materials, and pre-registration. The badges and the process that we're using have been developed by the Open Science Collaboration, and you can read more about them on the Open Science Framework, which I'll be telling you more about in a few minutes, or in the Psych Science Submission Guidelines. The first 2 badges are pretty obvious. The Open Data badge is earned for making the digitally shareable data necessary to reproduce the reported results publicly available. The criteria are that all digitally shareable data necessary to reproduce the reported results have to be available on a public open access repository, not just a personal or a departmental website. There also needs to be a code book with sufficient description for an independent researcher to reproduce the reported analyses and results. The Open Materials badge is earned by making the components of the research methodology publicly available. The criteria are that digitally shareable materials, such as stimuli or survey instruments, must be publicly available in an open access repository, again, not just on a personal or departmental website. Any infrastructure, equipment, biological materials, or other components that cannot be shared digitally must be described in sufficient detail for an independent researcher to understand how to reproduce the procedure. And there must be sufficient explanation for an independent researcher to understand how the materials relate to the reported methodology. The third badge is a little bit trickier. The idea of pre-registration isn't new to people in fields where the consort requirements have applied to reporting of clinical trials for the last 13 years or so. But the idea of pre-registering a design and analysis plan is new to most research psychologists. This badge is earned for having a design and analysis plan for the reported research and for reporting the results of that plan registered ahead of performing the study. An analysis plan has to include specification of the variables and the analyses that will be conducted. And the criteria are that the public date time-stamped registration has to be available in an institutional registration system. That could be, for example, clinicaltrials.gov or on the Open Science Framework. The registration has to predate the realization of the outcomes. The design and analysis plan has to correspond directly to the design and analysis that's reported. And there has to be full disclosure of the results following the registered plan. We published our first article with badges in March, and now we're up to at least 4 badge-winning articles online. It's important to note that we're trying to take a carrot approach rather than a stick approach here. We recognize that it's not always possible or ethical for authors to share their data. So we allow any author, whether they earn a badge or not, to include an open practices note in their article. And in that note, they can include links to any of their data or other materials, no matter whether they're available in a qualifying repository or just on a personal website. And the note can include an explanation for why data or materials can't be shared. Just go back a minute to what I mentioned, the Open Science Framework, which is where you can find information about the badges and about other projects of the Open Science collaboration. The Open Science Framework is an open source software project to build a web-based platform for scientific collaboration. It's been developed by the Center for Open Science with grants from groups such as the Laura and John Arnold Foundation. In a nutshell, this platform allows researchers to store, register, and share documents, materials, data, and notes. Scientists can document and archive studies. They can share and find materials. They can include details about individual contributions. They can create date and time-stamped registrations, the snapshots of material, data, and activities, and they can manage the scientific workflow. So it's basically like a lab management tool as well as a place to capture everything around the research project. OSF has formed the backbone so far for several large-scale replication studies. It's also one of the places authors can store data and materials or register their research and analysis plans to qualify for the badges that we award. And it's also an important tool for the next initiative I'm going to tell you about. In March 2013, Perspectives announced that it would begin publishing a new type of article, the Registered Replication Report. RRRs present the results of multi-center replications of important psychological research based on shared and vetted protocols and then combined into a single final publication. The process goes something like this. A lab decides that it wants to try to replicate a well-known study. They submit a query to the replication editors. And if the editors think the original study is important enough and the lab is well enough qualified, the lab develops a full proposal. The editors then take that proposal and work with the lab and with the original author or a proxy named by the original author to turn that proposal into a protocol. That protocol is aimed at allowing any lab to reproduce the original study or studies as closely as possible. Working with the original authors, the authors also determine whether any variations from the original methods or research environment are accepted. Once that protocol is finalized, we put out a call for additional labs to participate in the project. The editors evaluate those labs' secondary proposals, and some are approved and some are rejected before the project begins. The protocol and all the necessary materials are then shared via the Open Science Framework. And each participating lab is expected to use the framework for its work and for storing data and materials. Here's what the first project page looks like. We have about 30 labs participating in this particular project. Once the data collection is complete, the editors work with the labs to create a final report. And that final report consists of an introduction that explains not only the importance of the original study, but the reason why a more precise and cumulative estimate of the size and the robustness of the reported effect will benefit the field. It includes a detailed description of the shared protocol, and then uses a figure to show the effect sizes measured by each replication team, along with a meta-analytic estimate of the effect size. It has brief descriptions of the results and analyses for each individual replication attempt, and a brief discussion of the cumulative findings. The first two registered replication reports are at various stages of data collection and analysis, and we have more in the vetting phase. We also expect to publish the first final report this fall. A few things to note about these. First of all, the intention is not to search out flawed research. The opportunity that we have with these reports is to further explore the true effect sizes of certain findings. Sorry, folks. The second thing to note is that these are unique in that they enlist the original authors who get involved not only to vet the protocols and refine them, but also they're given an opportunity to publish a commentary on the final results. The third thing to know is that we're offering grants to help labs participate. For labs that need help, we provide funds to support everything from subject testing fees to equipment time. And we hope that by doing this, we'll be able to provide enough support to broaden the kinds of studies that are covered. For example, replications of fMRI studies are rarely undertaken because of the expense. And we're hoping that by providing funds, we can change that. I'm going to move away from the journals now and away from replication and research practices into pretty much every browser everywhere. This is a project that extends far beyond APS's journals and well beyond academia even into the general public's understanding of psychology. A few years ago, a group of APS leaders decided that it was time to stop complaining about the problems with information on the web and do something about them. So in December 2010, APS launched an initiative to deploy the power of Wikipedia to represent scientific psychology as fully and as accurately as possible, and thereby to promote the free teaching of psychology worldwide. The goals of this Wikipedia initiative are to ensure that articles about psychological research and theory are accurate, up-to-date, complete, and written in a style appropriate for the general public. It's also to improve and review Wikipedia articles to attain good and featured article status, and to assess psychology-related articles and tag them appropriately when there are problems. Working with Robert Kraut of the Human-Computer Interaction Institute at Carnegie Mellon and Rasta Farzan of the School of Information Sciences at the University of Pittsburgh, APS has built a portal to facilitate and track the creation and editing of Wikipedia entries related to psychology. This portal includes tutorial materials introducing Wikipedia, the Wikipedia community, and the editing process, tools to set up a class, make assignments, track individual student contributions, and allow for peer review, and easy ways to connect contributors to fellow volunteers and Wikipedia experts. To date, 3,300 psychological scientists and their students have signed up through the portal. And since the portal's launch, 105 classes have used it to assign Wikipedia entries to replace traditional writing assignments. We also know anecdotally that many more classes have used these without using the APS portal. The benefits of these Wikipedia-based writing projects and assignments are that they teach students that even the simplest ideas are hard to communicate to general audiences. Teach them the importance of logic, strength of argument, flow and clarity of writing, and citations of the appropriate literature. And it teaches them the significance of accuracy in scientific writing. There are now about 7,400 articles associated with psychology in Wikipedia. Of those, about 52% have been reviewed, but only 7% have good article status, and only 4% have ever been featured. In the past 6 months, low-quality articles on psychology have been viewed more than 64,000 times. Psychological scientists and their students are working to improve this through the Wikipedia initiative. I encourage you all to visit the APS website and read about the experiences of faculty and students who have participated in the project. I also encourage you to share information about this initiative with your users. Wikipedia is out there, and we can all work to make it a more accurate and thorough source of information. And the APS Wikipedia Initiative portal is a terrific tool to facilitate that. There are other things that you can do to help APS with the activities that I've discussed, besides talking about the Wikipedia initiative. The biggest one actually has to do with the badges. We need your help educating faculty, students, and your other users about the difference between storing data and materials on a personal or lab website and storing them in a public repository. We need help driving home the message that repositories are built to last, to provide free and public access and discoverability into perpetuity. You can also let them know about OSF, which is a relatively new, completely free, and constantly improving tool for the lab. It's not just for psychological scientists. It's also being used for a reproducibility project in cancer biology. And the goal is to make it a useful tool in any lab, in any field. Finally, you can let your users know about APS's resources, not only in the journals, but also on our website, which has a wealth of information for researchers, teachers, students, and for the general public. And that concludes my spiel, but I'd be happy to take questions about anything that I've talked about. I think John's going to organize them for me.
Okay, does any of the attendees have any questions? If so, feel free to use them to input them into your question box on the control panel. I'll give you guys just a few minutes to voice your questions. We have a question from Tim just about, looking forward to getting these slides. Yes, we can add the whole presentation is being recorded, and we will be putting it up on our website, as well as, sending out a link to all registrants of the webinar where they can access and download this presentation.
I see a question, John.
And we have a question from Camille. Does APS ever work directly with librarians in any of these efforts that you've mentioned?
We have not, although actually I'm not sure who else has been involved in the Wikipedia initiative, if other colleagues of Rasta Farzan, for example, have gotten involved. But we're certainly open to working with librarians on these things, and I would love to hear from anyone who wants to talk about this further.
Okay. And then we have a question from Tim as well. Has the OSF tool been integrated into a workflow for an institutional repository?
That's a very good question. I know that they're looking at a lot of different kinds of storage solutions and ways that they can work with the repository, say, and sort of coordinate to take a snapshot of something that's housed somewhere other than in OSF. Again, that's something that I'm sure that they are open to looking into and working on. It certainly would make sense.
Okay, and then we have a question from Suzanne. Have you found any of the fields of science to be more receptive to this open approach than others?
I can't really speak beyond psychological science. I think that a lot of times it depends not just on the field, although I would say that there are fields where this is really has been ingrained since much earlier. I think that it sometimes depends on not even just the broader field, but sort of the smaller field or the types of studies that are being done. It's much harder when somebody spends 5 years collecting longitudinal data on something to make that available when they feel like they're giving up the opportunity to do additional analyses and feel like maybe they're going to get scooped with their own data. So I think that a lot of the variations are from project to project and from area to area, not just across the different fields of science.
Okay, and then one more question from Camille. With their busy schedules, how have you gotten scholars to engage in the Wikipedia initiative? Are there any tips for librarians working with scholars?
I think that the main thing to do is to present it as this classroom tool. It really can kind of seamlessly take the place of traditional writing assignments and can be integrated. And we actually have some sample curricula and a lot of help, I think, for professors who are interested in doing that.
Okay, and then another question from Tim. Is the Wikipedia editing portal itself an open-sourced model that could be used by other fields? It sounds like a great way to involve students and practitioners in any field.
I apologize, I can't answer that question. I don't know if it's open source, but it does sound like something that would be applicable. And I think that the idea in developing it with the researchers that we've worked with to build it is that then that would be translated into other situations. And if you're interested in getting more information or contacting Rasta or Dr. Kraut, I'd be happy to send that information.
Okay. And then we have a question from Julia. Does participation in the Open Science Network cost participants money to join and participate? There's no cost to participate in the Open Science Collaboration or to use the Open Science framework. Mm-hmm. It's free. Okay. I'll just give another minute. That's all the questions that we've received so far. If anyone has any final questions, please go ahead and type them into your question box. Okay, it looks like that's about all we have as far as questions go. I'm John Walsh from SLA, and I would certainly like to thank Sage Publications for making this presentation possible, and Amy for the great information she just provided here today, as well as the APS for partnering with Sage and SLA to provide this SLA partner talk. Just a reminder, we will be sending out the link to all participants and all registrants to download this presentation if you're interested in receiving the slides and sharing with colleagues. And yeah, that's about it for us today. We'll sign off. Thanks everyone for joining this presentation, and thanks to our presenters and panelists and our partners. Hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, Amy.